They're just going to see this everywhere they go. Before you see a system or a matrix created, you're always going to find a story first. And like, for example, the story that got us into this mess now with working is you need to work in order to be a man. You need to work a 9 to 5. Right? That's just has no backing to it, no evidence to it. And if I can get people to believe the story, then that story will manifest into a matrix on its own. I barely have to do anything. If I just tell, like, for example, you'll see it on movies with a devil character. He'll go around whispering things in people's ears and they all start fighting and stuff. What that is really, that's a subconscious truth. If I tell a group of people, and you talk about this with the narcissist, if I could tell a group of people a very manipulative story, when I'm the problem, but I'm just talking to everybody one on the side. All I gotta do is sit back and watch the fireworks. I don't have to do anything.
Through connections with our reflections, we gain elevation.
All right. So peace and greetings, people. Welcome to the Network of Awareness, where the pursuit of knowledge meets the power of authentic conversation, as well as this is the place where we break the chains of fear-based programming so that we can reclaim our spiritual sovereignty. And today's guest is no stranger to the Network of Awareness, and is Eloheem Ali, who is a 4-time best-selling author, who's also a visionary and not just a content creator, but a community organizer that I'm collaborating with in his philosophy of order. So the reason why I wanted to have this in-depth conversation with Eloheem Ali is because I wanted to dive into the spell of racism. And this is the first brother that I've come across that has really broken that down in how racism is a spell. And not only are we going to discuss how racism is a spell, why it is a spell, but also more importantly, how we can overcome this spell from being bounded to it. We're talking about the spell of racism, and we're really looking at how racism operates almost like a narrative, right? Because Eloheem Ali talks about how narratives, and this is a narrative that people are conditioned to believe in. And it's a story, and it's been a story that's been repeated over and over again. And it's become almost part of the collective subconscious at this point. And in that way, it does act like a spell because it influences how people see themselves and how they see others. And here at the Network of Awareness is all about having meaningful connections with your reflection so that you can gain elevation. And what I've noticed about the spell of racism is that it creates this identity crisis that people cling on to, often egoically, right? And it sets up a lot of division. So let's really look into how this division is rooted in a long-standing historical context, and also how it perpetuates itself through media, social constructs, and through all those cultural toxic conditioning, so to speak. So let's start off with welcoming Eloheem Ali. Peace, balance, love, and abundance to you, brother. Welcome to the Network of Awareness.
Peace to you, man. It's always good to be here. Like you said, it's been a while since we've obviously spoken, but since I've been on here with you, and so very excited to do this.
So let's start off with this. Let's lay a foundation to this. Why don't you share with the audience what a spell is in terms of a narrative and a story, and really give some context to that?
You're right. So I'm gonna go really deep on this, deeper than I normally. Spell. Most people think of spells because of a lot of the books that people in the network of consciousness and spirituality put out. There's actually a confusion going on here. So look at the etymology. There's 2 etymologies for the word spell. There's spell as in spelling words, and there's spell as in a story. So a lot of people connect spells with just spelling words. Like they think the hocus pocus spell comes from that etymology, but the hocus pocus spell, that actually comes from the etymology of spell, meaning a story, a narrative, or a command. And actually that's where the word gospel comes from. The good spell, the God spell. The good news, the good story, God's story. That's what they were calling it. And so you got to spread that. And so in that same way, when people are interacting with the world, they're interacting with, we don't realize on the level we are, but everything that you interact with is story. Humans have a natural way. Humans, I don't have a better word for it. So I only either say miraculous or magical. I wish I had a better word, but humans are very miraculous. Humans are very magical. There's magic everywhere. There's miracles everywhere. And one of the main reasons is because of stories, because of narratives. So if a story is running in your subconscious mind, then you are under someone's spell. When you turn on your TV, the first thing they try to give to you, right? When we were growing up was the news, right? And the news is filled with narratives. The news is filled with spells. They're filled with stories and commands. For example, when the United States went to war with Iraq, we were told that it was because they had weapons of mass destruction and that they hated America and they wanted to destroy all of us. That's a story. And so that story goes in our subconscious mind. We're terrified. They told us that in our mail, you got to be careful in your mail. They're putting things in the mail and you could die if you open it, and all this stuff wasn't true, by the way. But they were saying these things to put us under a story and a spell of terror, right? They were the terrorists, right? They were the ones using stories to put us in a state of terror, right? And so why were they doing this? It enables them to do a couple things. One, they can invade places for oil that the people originally would not have been okay with. But number two, they can spy on you, right? When you're under a fear of terror, then you allow people to break the law, right? And what I mean by that is a law of privacy. And so if I can convince you that you're in danger, then I can convince you that for your own protection, I have to watch you. I need to put more cameras up. I need to watch you in the airport. I need to see everything you got in your suitcase, in your pockets. I need to go through your backgrounds. And normally you wouldn't say that people can do something like that, but because you're under the spell of this is necessary to save me from these people, then it enables you to do a lot of these things. And so when you go to school, people think they're there for education. You are not there to be educated. You are there to learn narratives and stories to put you under a spell. The main reason why you're in school is so that you could be under what I call the 9-to-5 spell, the career spell. In order for me to survive and to live a good life, I must have a career. I must work a job. And so they put a little piece of paper in front of you and they say, pick what you want to be when you grow up. Pick what you want to be when you grow up. And you pick something like a doctor. By the way, you're a child. You have no idea what it means to be a doctor. You don't know. Say, I want to be that. And then they tell you, you have to strive for that for the rest of your life. You're going to have to go to school for 8 years. You're going to have to spend all this money. And then you finally get there and you hate it. But why would you? Like, you didn't know anything about it. And so these are spells. And the powerful thing about a spell is, almost like you were just saying earlier, is that spells have this ability to not just affect you internally, but to affect the way you see the world itself. If I create a story about Aura, a negative story about Aura that is false, I might start believing that Aura is somebody that he's not. I can start interpreting his actions as things that he's not actually doing.
Well, there's
Aura,
narratives out there like that, by the way.
and so, for example, this happens with, going into the race spell today, it happens with police officers, right? So
Right.
if I'm under the spell that because you're browner than me, then you must be a violent person, right? Then you reaching for something looks to me like you're reaching for something to hurt me, to cause me harm. Now, obviously, I'm just reaching. Like, you asked me to get something, I'm going to get it. So narratives and stories can affect, but to even go deeper into that, nobody can sew a larger spell than a parent. And for all the parents watching, watch what you say to your children. Because the hardest spells and stories to break are the ones that mom and dad say. I don't care if you're 50. What your mom and dad say about you and the stories they tell about you has a tremendous effect. They did a study and they found out that a child's success rate is heavily connected to the expectation and belief in the stories that the parent believes about the child. Same thing with the teacher. Some of y'all think you did great in school because you were smarter than everybody. When sometimes the teacher just believed, they had a story about you in their mind that you were just the greatest student in the classroom. But maybe it was because you reminded them of their little brother or something. You don't know. But then their story then affects you and the way that you perceive yourself. And so spells have this ability not to only affect you and the way you see the world, but then it begins to spread and affect the way that everybody is seeing one another. And so they're very powerful. And the last thing I'll say about this is that it goes back to humanity. When we used to hunt, when we used to track, if anybody knows what tracking is from hunting, tracking is when you have let's say you're hunting a deer or something and you lost it. And so you have to look at footprints. You have to look at the branches. This is a story you're creating. He went here. He moved against the branches. He fell here. He got up. He went around the corner. And this is tracking, but through tracking, you have to start telling yourself a story. Now, the funny thing is, the humans who could tell the best stories could survive the best. And to me, this is the most fundamental part about spells, is that they're good and bad. So they can be good, they can be bad. You have Aura from universe B, believes. By the way, let's say this spell is not objectively true, but Aura from universe A believes that he could truly do anything, right? That's his story. His parents told him, you are actually incredible. I have never met a child like you. You are incredibly intelligent. You are awesome. You are going to do great things. You are burdened with greatness. And they're telling him this his entire life. And he believes it. Versus from universe B, who doesn't believe it. He doesn't think that he can do anything. He thinks that he's worthless. Now, who is going to do better? Let's say the story's false. Let's say, or it can't do it. Doesn't matter. The one who believes in that positive spell is the one who's going to completely outperform the other aura. And so stories, spells, narratives in your subconscious minds are vital to understand, vital to think about.
I was thinking when you were talking about the best storytellers are the ones that are good at surviving, how I've come to know throughout the years, because narcissism is one of my specialties in bringing out on my channel and on my platforms. And I was just thinking about how narcissists are really good storytellers. They're really good at surviving, and they're really good at crafting stories and spells. And they're really good at triangulating people to gravitate to those spells, and the whole flying monkey thing in clinical psychology and how they could get other people to believe what they're saying. So it's very interesting. And see, this is this is the reason why I brought Elohim Ali on here, because he understands this narrative and how it's constructed. And more importantly, he also knows how to deconstruct it, which we will get into later on this episode on the spell of racism. But the other question that I have for you too is, so Elohim, in your view, how do we start recognizing the spell of racism in our own lives and in our communities? What are some of the telltale signs that we can recognize that this spell does exist and it's in our life and it's in the communities that we interact with day to day?
First, we have to understand what the race spell truly is. So the race spell I talk about is actually not the first race spell, and I'll go into that today. But the race spell that I talk about the most is the one that affects us the most today, which is the black and white race spell. Now, as I say, black and white people don't exist. And I've been begging people online, just show me one.
Yeah, I concur with that statement.
Yeah, just show me, give me one. And when they show me somebody maybe black in the way that maybe my hair is brown, it just looks black right now. But if you were to compare it to something truly black, you would see that, no, his hair is not actually black. If you were to do the same thing with what people say, my teeth are white. But we know if you put their teeth next to something that's truly white, it looks more yellow. And there aren't really any white or black people, even people who are albino, right? And so the question is, where did this come from? And the origins of spells are very important to understand, because when you understand the origin of it, everything else is put in its proper context. And so what happened was, there was a man named William Berkeley, and he had to rule a colony. This is a Virginia colony. This is prior to the United States of America, though. And so the reason why that's important context is because prior to the United States of America, there is no black and white people. These terminologies to describe humans are not yet here. And you had enslaved people who were European, you had enslaved people who were African. And for them, they were just enslaved people who looked different. There wasn't any race spell for them to be in at this time. And so this man named Bacon, now Bacon, he's not actually really a good person either, if I'm being honest. Sometimes people who lead revolutions, when you study them, some of them aren't always the best people, if I'm being honest with you. Some of them are, but some of them aren't. But he realizes, man, if we were to all come together, what could these elitists do? They can't do anything. And this is the fear of the elite, is when people come together and say, wait, why are we listening to them? What are they going to do if we come together? We got more people We're smart. They can't beat us. We're the ones who know how to do everything. That we're born rich. They don't even know how to do anything. And so they said, why don't we just come together and overthrow the elite? And it was working. And so William Berkeley, on the other elites, they came together and they created the terminology white to describe Europeans. And they put it into law. They said, from now on, European men, you are going to be this thing called white. And that means that you cannot be hanging with the African people who would eventually be called black, because we're going to give you things. So now I always call it the club white. Now that you're in club white, I will give you X and I will give you Y and I will give you Z, but you cannot. Segregation, people misunderstand segregation. Segregation is not there simply because people hate each other. Segregation was put in place to keep groups from coming against elitists. These are why these laws were actually put into effect. And it shows throughout history. And so the reason why that's important is because once you understand that that's where it started, you understand how it's being played every day. If you notice, every time we start coming together, different groups are unsettled when the economy's hard and people are starting to say, you know what, man, maybe the elites are the problem. They'll take out a video of police brutality. By the way, police brutality is obviously terrible, but what I'm saying is they'll use it. Like sometimes I used to wonder, I don't know if it's ever happened to anybody else watching this. One would come out and then you'll look up when it happened and it'd be like years ago. This happened years ago? Why am I just hearing about this? And why right now? It's just a weird time for me to hear about this case at this moment when we're all about to come together against the government, right? And that's the reason, is because they need to keep us separated. There was a man in the Black Panther Party. He was only like 23 when he was assassinated. Man, how am I forget his name? They made a movie about him called Judas and the Black Messiah. But main point is that they had no problems with him originally. He's a part of the Black Panther Party, and it wasn't until he created something called the Rainbow Coalition. And he said, you know what? Why don't we get the impoverished European people, the impoverished Mexican or Latino communities, the impoverished, like, why don't we go from all the groups and why don't we all come together since we're all being oppressed? And then all of a sudden he was assassinated. And so that is normally when it becomes an issue. When did Malcolm X become a problem? It wasn't when Malcolm X was saying that all white people were the devil. When the government decided to take some sort of action against Malcolm X is when Malcolm X said, look, man, I'm still all for empowering what he called black people, Negroes, but we need to be working with white people, Latinos, like other groups. Like, why aren't we, there's other people being oppressed. Why don't we all just come together and work on the problem together? They're like, no, absolutely not. And so racism is used in that way to keep the people in power at the top and to keep us all at the bottom. This is another thing that people don't like to hear. When they teach you slavery, they teach it to you from the wrong perspective. They should be teaching this was an era in time when the elitists were enslaving African people. That's not what they teach you. They teach you that an entire group called white people enslaved everybody else. That is not what happened. One, Irish people and Jewish people were not considered to be white at the time. Two, neither were Italians.
They were actually treated very badly by other Europeaners that they considered them foreigners. Especially here, they showed you that in the movie Gangs of New York. And also, by the way, that brother was named, or that started in the Black Panther movement and was assassinated. His name was Fred Hampton.
Thank you, brother. I could not think of the name. Okay, so those groups were different. Not that there weren't Irish people who owned African peoples and there were Native Americans who owned African peoples, but those, again, these are like selective, rare cases. The main people who were owning enslaved people was a small, I think the population was somewhere between 7 and 10% of the entire United States. That's a very low, that's literally the 10%. And the ones who had the large slave plantations that you're taught about in school was the 1%. Most people couldn't even afford to partake in what's called the slave trade. They couldn't afford the ship, the people, the labor. This stuff cost money. And so when they tell y'all, when you're growing up, when they tell you, hey, this entire group enslaved you, that is in order to create separation. And so now you go to a European person and say, you enslaved my people. And they're literally like, bro, literally not one of my enslaved person. Now, did a group of people benefit from that. Of course, 100%. Just as you're benefiting today from the enslavement and the oppression of other groups around the world. But I don't think it means that you have to separate yourself from another group because they benefited from oppression. I, as an American citizen, unfortunately benefit from all the oppression in the Middle East. We do. In fact, if they were to lose control of the Middle East today, you will see an economic collapse like you've never seen before in your life. And that's just the reality. Same thing with imprisonment. This country is, that's slavery too. And we're ran on these things. But to circle back to the main point, it goes even deeper. So this is something I don't share. So I'll share it first here on this podcast. I rarely talk about this. But some of the oldest, and I guess this is really important to say right now with today's climate, some of the earliest times that we see this race spell manifesting, this story, is amongst religions, actually, specifically amongst, first we see it with the Christians and the Jewish people, and then we see the Christians do it to the Muslims. Originally, there was no white and black, so the way that they made these separations was actually due to religion. They would say that this is a Christian nation, so we don't enslave Christian nations. Muslims did the same thing. This is a Muslim nation, we don't enslave Muslim nations. If you were a Muslim, then you were my brother. If you were a Christian, then you were my brother. If you were not, then you were separated in that way. I don't want to go too far into the details of it because I don't want to say anything inaccurate. It's been so long since I looked it up. But what you'll see with the Catholics and the Jewish people is you'll see not only a separation of this is a separate religion, but then they go, there's something different in your blood than in a Christian's blood. And this is a big deal, right? Because we don't really see that a lot prior to that. Prior to that, you see a lot of tribalness. Tribalism is not racism, you know.
That narrative that you speak about that played itself out as far as racism playing itself out in a different way, but through religion happened in the Crusades, especially with the Knights Templars, the Muslims that were considered the Saracens. And that racism, a lot like, especially during colonialism and the invasions that happened here and all that stuff. But a lot of it was violent. A lot of it was like, it was a type of racism where most of the time you got your head chopped off because of your background religiously.
Yep, 100%.
But your religious background was usually to what region you come from.
Yeah.
So the way you dressed, the way your skin complexion was, all of that was identifiers for somebody to say, okay, he's a Christian, he's a Muslim, or he's whatever sect they were from. They had different names. But it noticed that a lot of death came about this racism.
And they start draining blood and saying that, and that's when you get a distinction from like religion or ethnicity when you start talking about blood. And they start saying that Jewish people's blood is different than our blood. And the reason why that's a bigger problem than just a religious distinction is because in the past, the way to escape this was to just convert. If somebody converted, they could escape a lot of this. But once we make it about blood, there's no converting. There is something different. Now, the reason why I brought up Jewish people, and I just want to make a disclaimer, so this podcast isn't going to censor anything. By no means am I saying that anybody should be anti-Semitic. I think that's stupid. I think it's horrible. I don't think anybody should hate anybody due to their religion or ethnicity. And I just got to say all that because of the political climate that we're in. But here's the reality. So you can use that race spell and as a reverse Uno card. So it is true, for example, that Jewish people have been, that this specific kind of Jewish people, and we could go deeper into that if we want, but this particular kind of Jewish people, because remember, just as somebody who studies the Bible and studies like biblical history, it's more complicated than people think, right? You have tribes of Israel in the southern and the northern part of Israel. Those tribes were lost when the Assyrian attack happened. The Israel in history is not the Israel today. They're not the same thing. They literally are not the same thing at all. And so once that happens, we don't know what happens to all those tribes. All you're left with is, I believe, the tribe of Benjamin and the tribe of Judah. Now, when the tribe of Judah becomes...
Man, don't get me started with the tribe of Judah. There's so many people that subscribe to the tribe of Judah.
Right. And so the tribe of Judah, even that gets so lost. And so this is why it happens. And because it gets lost, people begin... Okay, so yeah, this is important to break down. So tribes at a time, this is also the confusion going on right now with Native Americans, European Americans, and African Americans. So originally people didn't have this thing called race. That's how we think of being indigenous and Native American. At the time, if you wanted to be Native American when you first came here, all they require is that you join the tribe, you live as they live, then you are a native. There wasn't a whole like, oh, you got to be my race. It was like, bro, so if you have somebody who's been a Native American living amongst the Native American for 400 years, even if you find out that this person is genetically African, genetically European, they would tell you, kick rocks. I've been living like this and practicing this lifestyle for 300 to 400 years. I can't even go far enough back in my ancestry to say when we started. Who are you to come in now and say that I'm not this? And the same thing would happen in the Jewish community. So the Jewish people, Israelites come from Canaanites. So that's a whole other thing in itself. But the Israelites eventually become their own thing. And these are a bunch of different tribes. Again, their thing was originally, this is our tribe. That's why they're all called tribes. This is our tribe. If you live in our way, if you believe in what we believe, then you are a part of our tribe. Now, the tribes get lost. And literally, anybody can look this up. You have tribes of Judah in Asia, in Africa, and what we call the Middle East. And we know this because now we have genetic markers to trace them all back. And they also have the same practices to that time when they were quote unquote lost. Now, these tribes don't like to be called lost. They're like, we didn't get lost. You're calling us lost because we weren't with the current group of Jewish people. So we're lost. We're not lost. We kept practicing. We never stopped doing the practices. We're not lost. Maybe y'all were lost. And so that's their disposition. But the reason why I say that is because it's not as simple as they try to make it seem today. Now, fast forward, again, Jewish people, oppressed, stuff like that. Now, there are things like the Talmud, which I'm not going to get into right now, that a lot of people, when they read, were very disturbed by. So that, and there's other reasons, I'm not going to get into them, but the main point is that they were legitimately facing persecution. I think even if somebody has weird practices, a weird culture, a book with terrible things in it, I don't think it means that this group should be oppressed. I think that you should say those are bad beliefs like we do on our podcast. That's dumb that you believe in that. I don't think you should believe in that. But if you want to believe that, go ahead, but you're not going to bring that over here. People should not be wiped out for belief. Also, I just want to say clearly that when families take over things, you should not blame the group that looks like the elites for what the elites are doing. So when Jewish elites do things in the world, for some reason, some young kid, 12-year-old Jewish kid, gets jumped and beat up for what elitists across the world are doing. It's ridiculous. This is a part of the race spell. But let me tell you why this is so important, what we're talking about now. So remember, origins are important. And some of this did originate with the whole Christian and Jewish thing and Jewish blood and things of that nature. What was happening is after the Holocaust, some of the elitist Jewish groups, not the regular Jewish people, but some of the elitists, what they decide to do is, man, we can use this as like a Uno reverse card. Anytime we do something terrible, anytime we do something bad, and somebody challenges on it, we'll just say, you're racist, you're anti-Semitic. And that's a new kind of race spell. Because now, every time, y'all just saw the whole long disposition I gave just to get to this point. Because I know most people are so under this specific kind of race spell that even if I speak about Jewish people, even if I do everything I just did for y'all, they'll say, he's speaking against because he's anti-Semitic or he's racist. And so they found a way to use the race spell as a shield to protect them from the evil deeds that they're doing on the planet. And more importantly, they do it because they also know that you're under the race spell, meaning that they're going to get away with it. When they do evil things, you don't go after them. You go after the just regular Jewish people on the streets that got nothing to do, some Jewish kid in New York that got nothing to do with Benjamin Netanyahu, doesn't care about that kid in New York. Just like your elitist government don't care about you. Just like when people come over here terrorizing Americans based on what your leads do, you'd be like, whoa, I don't agree with them. I don't want them to do those things that they're doing over there. And so this is how the race spell on many layers, on black and white, on Jewish, on Israel, it plays in so many places. And the only way that, in my opinion, that we can start breaking free from it is first being cognizant that it is a spell, that we're all just different shades of brown, and we're all just humans, and that there's no group of people that you can destroy. And this is another topic that will make an evil thing go away. You got to get to the matrix.
Yeah, and I shared a video of this on my previous account that got banned on TikTok about the whole narrative behind the word anti-Semitic and how that word was actually developed in I believe it was in the 16 or 17 in Europe by certain elitists in politics. And that was a word that eventually would be like a safeguard for the elitists that were investing money to pass laws to utilize to protect them. And to anybody who went against them, and there was a senator in the United States in the 1980s during the Reagan administration who talked about this, who talked about how there's people in the Senate, in Congress, that are supporting Israel and are using this anti-Semitic narrative to protect themselves, that whenever you go against something that they're doing, that they're investing money in, that's going to be a disadvantage to communities, then the anti-Semitic card would be thrown out there if you went against them, to say, hey, if you go against us, we're going to hit you with the anti-Semitic, and then everybody's going to be against you, and then you're going to be blackballed and all that other stuff.
100%.
So you went into some of the things on this next question I was going to ask you, but I want to be a little bit more specific now in this modern culture, not just present day, but let's just say within the last 70 years, right? And you grew up here in the United Shenanigans of America. I grew up here in the United Shenanigans of America. And one thing, I was a track star. I played basketball.
Oh, I didn't know you ran track. What did you do in track?
I was real fast, bro. I ran the 400, I ran the mile, and I did cross country as well.
Man, that's dope.
Yeah.
I'll tell you my track story later, but go ahead.
I ran an 800 in like 1.43.
Man, that's awesome.
I think it was my fastest ever. But anyway, I noticed this growing up. And as I got older, it really came crystal clear to me by the time I was in my 20s. And before I ask you the question, this is why I'm bringing this up, is because there's a lot of ways that systematic racism and racism as a spell is reinforced here in the USA. One of the ways I noticed that is very psychological. It's a psychological warfare, in the sense that every time I used to watch the media when it came to sports, whether it be football, basketball, baseball, there was this one kind of phrase that would deepen the spell. And I caught it. Like, I would catch it. And I'm like, that's this reinforcement of the spell. And it'd be the one that says, so-and-so is the first black man to hit 300 home runs, or the first black woman to win the Olympics, or the first black man to rush 3,000 yards in one season. And every single time they say the first this and that. And it used to be comical to me, because I'm like, we know that melanated people have been on this planet forever. So to say that they're the first one, it's foolish when you think about it. But that's how they would reinforce the narrative. So my question to you is, what's one, or if you want to give several, but what's some of the ways that you've seen that this narrative is reinforced, but also how can we actively dismantle it?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because, and as you know, in the philosophy of order, it starts with the fact that everything that comes into being needs a matrix, a medium or structure to develop in. So races have become their own spirits. A spirit is a collection of attributes that make something what it is, in essence. And though they do not exist genetically, race now exists on an abstract level. And therefore the race spell is manifesting. And so that's why some people say, though race isn't real, racism is real, because that's just the reality. So one, there's the matrix of racism, the matrix of the race spell. And so we're going into that. The race spell is kept alive normally through education and media. That's like the main two ways that you keep the race alive. But the way you keep the oppressive systems alive are through government. Normally when people try to make some progress through, let's say, allowing people to be equals, one is misguided, but normally, even if it wasn't, you're always going to get somebody in power who might not even have known they were under the race, might have even thought that they don't think everybody's different, but they might become uncomfortable with the fact that somebody who doesn't look like them is doing well. And so this actually goes into the, not to keep coming back to the Holocaust and Jewish people, but this goes into that. So if people aren't familiar with what happened, right, you had a group of immigrants come into a country and they start doing very well economically, like insanely well, like better than the people living there. So you would think that the only way that could happen if the people were open to that happening. But what you find in history in different societies, and this is why we say, before you create a new matrix, you got to get rid of this. You got to replace the bad spell with a good spell. Because I can build a matrix, but if I'm under a spell, then I'm building within that matrix the spell. And I am going to still act for that spell. And so I'm going to give you examples. In every place, in different places, this happens. It's not just Germany. This happens literally around the world in different histories in Rome. You get a group that thinks they're very progressive and they say, come on in, everybody, like from other countries, come in. Let's do great. But let's say that America lets everybody in, and for whatever reason, specifically, Nigerians start taking over all of the companies for whatever reason. Let's say they had meetings, let's say that they talked, let's say they just think differently than we do, and they're not into letting their kids do whatever they want. They are specifically into getting their children into banks and politics and lobbying. Let's say that they're not concerned with anything else. And we start noticing that. Now, as progressive as people think they are, but because we're under the race spell, we're going to begin to group ourselves. We're going to say they are trying to come in and take over. And by the way, they might be. And so then we're going to start creating more matrices and laws to stop that from happening. Because as much as we might say we don't believe in race and we think that we're all one people, because the race spell still exists in us, once we get to that final stretch of another group getting in power in any other way, normally your race spell instincts are going to kick in and you're going to start trying to oppress that group back down to the bottom. And so you're going to just see that throughout history. It's not unique to any one group. It's not like Germans are like some specifically evil group of people. This literally happens like around the world and around history all the time. So to really break free is, one, we have to be aware of the race spell. We got to be aware that there are no black and white people, that we're all just humans. African people, European people, Jewish people, we're all humans. Nothing makes one better than the other. Just because I have more melanin than somebody else doesn't mean that I'm superior. Just because you have less melanin than me doesn't mean that you're superior. Everybody has their niches, but here's something that I don't talk about often. Before I get there, boom, you have to recognize that. Boom, you have to create a matrix that is outside of government. If you have government, which is centralized power, all you need is one person to oppress another group of people based on their genetics and based on their race. So that's a whole nother thing that goes into FAMs and things of that nature. But the one I wanted to bring to you today is the simple fact that two things can be true at the same time. So we can all be human and still all be different. We can all be the same species and still be all different. So you have tribes, and then you have people that come from the land, the same thing. So I could join indigenous tribe. Let's say I join it based off of my great grandmother. She was indigenous, right? And I joined that tribe. But it might take time for the land to receive my children. So what do I mean by that? A matrix is a medium or structure in which you develop in. So if there's a land, that land has to take you in. And by take you in, I mean you become one with that land. For example, if you move certain peoples to other parts of the planet, they're going to have a hard time surviving. If you move somebody from the Congo to Russia, their children are going to be born with disabilities because they're not getting the amount of vitamin D that their body expects them to get. They're not eating the fruits and the vegetables that their ancestors were eating. So when you live somewhere for a certain amount of time, that land begins to claim you. You become one with that land. Your skin may start to look a lot like the soil. Your digestive system might be only able to take in the food from that land. And so all these different groups that you're seeing around the world, they have a motherland, they have a piece of land in which they came out of. And so it's important for us to accept the differences. So while we also accept that we are all human, we have to also accept that there are things that make us different, and that is okay. That's not a problem. These are good things. There's nothing wrong with that. And there's going to be things that one group is naturally, for the most part, better at than other groups. That doesn't mean that one group overall is superior, because people fit in where they get in. If you have a group that is like, for example, they say Africa is the most diverse continent, but that means good and bad things. That means that the tallest people on average come from Africa, but also the shortest people on average come from Africa. If there's any genetic component to intelligence, that would mean the smartest person is in Africa, but also the dumbest person is in Africa. You get what I'm saying? It's just a part of the way that nature plays out. Nature is extremely diverse. And if we accept our differences and understand beyond those differences, we are truly one species and one group, we can create a new matrix, right? Outside of the one that we've created now, that does not keep creating this systemic racism that we enjoy now. But as long as we are continuously focusing on separating one another, pretending like one group is superior to the other, because my hair is 9/8 I'm better than you, because my hair is blonde, I'm better than you. As long as we play that game, we're just going to see the same results over and over again, and they're just going to keep running away with all the power.
Yeah, before we even get into that architecture of division, because I'm going to touch on that too, just real quick, do you have an experience that you can share where you had this transformative moment that made you see through that illusion and it helped you to step into a more unified perspective? Because you and I had private conversations about this, that the man you was 10 years ago is not the man that you are now, based on an experience that you and I had talked. It's a private
Right.
situation, but anyway, remember you told me, you said, "Hey, I used to say these types of things
Yeah.
about people, and I'm not like that now." So, is there an experience that you could share where you had that transformative moment that helped you to step into a more unified perspective about humanity?
I'm very stubborn, so I'll give you the whole breakdown. So we all come into this world as humans, and then civilization makes us something else. So every kid doesn't care what color kids are. Kids do all the time. You want to play? My friend, you want to go do this? Nobody cares. It's not like I couldn't tell that some kids have blonde hair and blue eyes and I didn't, but it just, who cares? But eventually that changes. So I had that disposition for longer than most. And I was in a very racist, we moved from a predominantly Black or African American neighborhood to a very Eurocentric, patriotic neighborhood with extremely racist kids. Like I was being called stuff like knuckle dragger. Me and my brother had to fight every day coming home. I was never called the N word before in my life, especially with the hard ER at the end of it. And so these were all very new experiences for me, but I just tried not to care about that stuff. For a while, I didn't believe in it. Wasn't until high school that I was like, okay, like y'all are racist. And if you say anything racist to me, I'm just going to beat you up. That's how I became in high school. And then by college, I went to a HBCU. And so now I was already raised in a pro-Black household, but in college, I was able to dive even deeper into African-centeredness, Afrocentricity, pro-Blackness. And these are, to me, honestly, positive things in my life. But I went down a direction of white people are the devil. That was like, I'm studying. So a lot of people of color, when we study history, we normally start with colonialism, or we might start before that. We might go to pre-colonial societies. Man, things are pretty great. And then you study like all the horrible, terrible things that happened. And you're like, who did this? They did it. People who look like them. And
That's right.
you're like, shoot, y'all are the devil. If y'all did that, y'all are demons. And so that's what I was saying when I was in college. I'm like, man, I don't want to hear that y'all are walking demons. And this is just truly what
Well,
I believed.
you know what's interesting, bro, is that even with those stories, when you're studying like colonization in the Americas. What's interesting is there's always somebody controlling that narrative.
Mhm.
So there is an architecture to division, which I'm glad that you talked about this because it's helping me to segue to this. Racism didn't begin as hatred. It began as like a hierarchy, and it
Yeah.
was manufactured, and it was designed to justify power, to
Mhm.
justify control, to justify economic dominance and status, and then eventually it built around the human psyche. And then it was engineered to go through the languages, through the laws, through all the labels. Now, boom, you got a poison, distorted perception, and then it got anchored into the very DNA of society.
White man's
What's interesting
burden,
is when
things
I
like
look
that.
back on colonialism, it's who's controlling the narrative. And I'm always going to say so-called when I make these references to what a black man is, a white man,
Mhm.
and all these social constructs. But the white man back in those days and white women, there was a lot of them that were actually helping people that were enslaved
Oh,
in
yeah.
more ways than one.
Oh, yeah.
But those stories get suppressed
Yes, they
within
do.
the narrative of the context in which you learn about this stuff. You learn
100%.
about all the vicious stuff. You learn about all the tyranny and the disgusting
100%.
rapes, all the disgusting stuff. They show it to you in the movies, like 12 Years a Slave. That movie was a prime example of what we're talking about here when it comes to this narrative that gets people emotionally charged, right?
Yes.
And then that emotional charge leads people to look at others like they just saw somebody get brutally murdered during this time period. And then immediately they start thinking everybody's like this. But notice how they don't talk about how black people and white people were helping each other out and getting along just fine against this tyranny, against this social ill, this racism spell. But they won't tell you that in the books, which leads
Oh,
me
yeah.
to
Go
this
ahead.
architecture of division, because you talk about architecture a lot in the philosophy of order community. And people still believe to this day that they're divided by color, creed, culture, and they forget that they all come from the same creation. This is something I talk about a lot. I'm like, we can agree to disagree on many different perspectives, but at the end of the day, we have to respect that we come from the same source of creation,
Yes.
period.
Yes.
This spell was casted, right, through repetition, because we
Mhm.
know through auto suggestion, if something keeps getting repeated to the brain,
Yeah.
it will now be programmed subconsciously to run on autopilot. So
Yep.
you got all these colonial textbooks with a certain narrative. You got the biased headlines in the media. You got the stereotypes being recycled through movies and media and all that stuff. And the code is being written into the subconscious each and every single time, one generation after the next. And then it gets just like, it gets passed down as the story. Just like in indigenous people, when they weren't writing books, they were passing down
Mhm.
heritage and traditions through stories. So those stories can get passed on from generation to generation. It's the same thing with this race spell. And for me, I know that breaking this spell means that we have to deprogram the mind, just like you have to deprogram the mind to understand that we've been lied to and that what we've been lied to is a lie. And any cognitive dissonance that we come across with our belief system, we just got to let it go and overcome that cognitive
100%.
dissonance so that we can be deprogrammed, so that we can reprogram ourselves with a truth that we can live by and get rid of all these spells.
I'm just going to write down a note something that you said and I wanted to comment on.
Because awareness is, I always say, awareness is the antidote. Awareness is the key. Awareness enters, the illusion begins to dissolve, because energy cannot maintain a lie once it's seen in the light of truth. It's like you can't unsee it no more. So it's just like when a soul wakes up to its divinity, it no longer identifies with pigmentation. Because when you said the thing about the 9 ether, man, that narrative is being pushed on TikTok. It's real heavy. But we can transcend this, right? We can transcend this.
Right.
My question to you is, and this is going to be an interesting question for you, and I'm really excited to hear what your answer is to this, but do you, and I'm just going to use the word belief, which is it's not a belief. I don't really like using the word belief, but
Okay.
I'm going to ask it in this way. Do you believe that racism can only truly end If it was to end, do you think it can end without a spiritual awakening? Or does society have to ascend in consciousness in order for there to be a realization of equality that
Okay.
can actually be real and be the standard way of living as a people, as a humanity, as a whole, on the whole entire planet?
Okay. So there's so much to say on everything you said, and actually this all goes right into the answer of your question. So like I wanted to say just so after I learned, it's all connects exactly to the hierarchy. So when I was learning and I was like, oh, white people are demons and they're devils and Europeans are demons and devils. Because I was studying, so Lincoln has one of the best libraries, and you can literally go into a book and read what people are saying, what I call slave monsters are saying, and what the enslaved are saying. And you can read these stories. And so I started to come across some interesting stories. So stories where it wasn't the narrative that I was fed. So I came across the white man's burden. Now, this was interesting because you had a group of colonists create a story called the white man's burden. And they said, everybody in the world, these people are godless and they're hybrids. And it is our burden as white people to save the dark continent, right? So I was like, why would they? If Europeans are evil, these people have to convince them to colonize, to conquer, and to wipe these people out. Like, why do I have to convince evil people to do evil things? So this was a question in my brain, but I was under that race spell, so I couldn't get to the obvious truth of it. And then I saw people like, I forgot his name was John something, but this was a European American man. He used to go around killing slave monsters or slave owners. And he was eventually put to death.
You're talking about John Brown.
John Brown. Man, you always remember the last names. I don't know how hard time, but yes, John Brown. And so that was a big one for me. That one challenged everything.
In the South, even in Virginia, in certain places up north, they'd be like, I'll be John Brown. Whenever like a white person would do something nice or good or positive.
Really? I didn't know that.
What's going on?
It's funny
Yeah.
because John Brown was a big one for me. It was like, whoa, now that isn't. See, and what I always say with spells, you have to throw things that cause cognitive dissonance. That's
Yes.
like always the things that kind of knocks at it, like because my brain has to figure that out. If they're all evil, they're all bad. Why is this man doing this? Why are these people doing that? Why do they have to convince? And so I had a spiritual experience that literally gave me the philosophy of order and everything. But even after that, I had a whole spiritual, everything I teach now is from this one spiritual experience. From, I'll just say it, from an abstract entity that was trying to talk to me since I was a kid, but I grew up Christian, so I thought it was the devil, and I would always reject it. And it never could speak with me without permission. And one day in college, I gave permission, and nobody would be getting any of this without that happening. And the funny thing is, I was already told through that experience, not in the words that I say to people now, but that this is a race spell. But I couldn't accept it. I could not accept it at first. I wanted to reject it. And it wasn't until I had actually my daughter that I was like, I don't want to give this to her. I don't want to give this burden of my traumas and things. She's not going through this.
I was just going to say, you didn't want to pass on like a generational curse.
100%.
You were breaking the generational curse by contemplating whether you wanted to pass that on to her or not.
100%. And I didn't. And I didn't. I said, I don't want to give this to her. And so I had to change and I had to accept these things that I was taught. And the other thing I wanted to say was, and this was going to answer your question. So civilization in itself is a matrix, right? It's a devouring matrix. It's one that takes and keeps you in a state of dependency. But I used to wonder, how does the matrix make fake things real? Because it's good at it. Like rent is fake. How did it make it real? Like all these things we live by. How did it make these things real? So this is how it normally goes. Civilization will create a story or a spell, right? It'll create a story. And from that story will normally come a matrix. So the story, the way it works, you'll see this all the time. Now that I say this, people are just going to see this everywhere they go. Before you see a system or a matrix created, you're always going to find a story first. And for example, the story that we were told that got us into this mess Now is you need to work in order to be a man, you need to work a 9 to 5. Right? That's a story. It has no backing to it, no evidence to it the first time it was said, but it was a story. And if I can get people to believe the story, then that story will manifest into a matrix on its own. I barely have to do anything. If I just tell, like, for example, you'll see it on movies with a devil character. He'll go around whispering things in people's ears and they all start fighting and stuff. That's a subconscious truth. If I tell a group of people, and you talk about this with the narcissist, if I could tell a group of people a very manipulative story when I'm the problem, but I'm just talking to everybody one-on-one on the side, all I got to do is sit back and watch the fireworks. I don't have to do
Especially
anything.
if you could do it in a convincing manner, though. Let's not
Right.
forget that.
Or I'm just so good at acting like it's true. Did you know that they're saying this about you? I didn't want to tell you. This is what they think. And then you go to the different people and all you got to do is sit back and watch. You don't have to create this new system of chaos. You don't have to sustain the system of everybody hating each other. All you had to do was plant the stories in each and every one of their minds. Positive and negative, by the way. When people do it to their children, they and they just sit back and they just watch them grow into this amazing thing. And stories, that's how the matrix is created. Now, once you have the matrix will then give birth to more spirits or stories. So it becomes cyclical and you get it over, and that's on autopilot. Like you get stories creating stories and matrices creating matrices. And so when it comes to the question you asked, does it need to be a spiritual awakening? People really only have two options. The same thing I believe about racism, the same thing I believe about civilization. You can either let it go through enlightenment, through a spiritual process and realization, or you'll just have to suffer the destructive consequences and then it will be gone, right? Because these things are unsustainable. Racism is unsustainable, civilization is. So either you choose when you get out of it or nature chooses when you get out of it. But what I always try to explain to people, I don't even think that these spirits are evil, like spirits of entropy and such. Like a hurricane's not evil. A hurricane, if people don't know, a hurricane is made to cool things down. You get hurricanes when things are too hot. It's a way that the earth cools itself down. So if you're doing things that are causing an unnatural amount of heat, now you can fix it. You can fix it, or nature can fix it. So,
And nature has a very, let's just put it, a very concise way about fixing things to make sure they get fixed.
100%. And so that's what humans have to deal with. The reason why it's unsustainable is because it goes like this, goes racism, and then it looks like it's going down, but it's just being suppressed. And it goes a little higher and it goes down, but it's just being suppressed and it goes high. But eventually, if you hit a certain boil point, and we already had this with the Civil War, but when you hit a certain boil point of either racism, prejudice, things of this nature, you get an event. And the Civil War wasn't what it could have been. That was best case scenario for that point. If you look at other cultures, point is an entire group gets completely wiped out.
Yeah, genocide.
Completely.
Yeah, and when I was asking you about that transformative experience that you had, I've had many. Just not realizing the thing about what the commentators would say in sports, but I had one of the big telltale signs for me that this is an illusion, this racism thing and this division and how deep the spell goes is when I watched a movie and then I did some research about Hotel Rwanda and about the Ulis. I think they were called the Ulis and the Tulis. The Hututis or Tulis.
Tutsi. So, I can't remember.
And then that's when it really hit me because I'm like, wait a second. You got people in Africa killing other Africans that were lighter skin complexion and from a different territory, and the ones that were of darker skin complexion.
Hold on, let me just say real quick. Here's how crazy it was. They had different of necks and arms. One was like different body types than the others. But go ahead. Yeah.
It was crazy though. It was crazy, and I just was like, and it was violent. It was genocidal to some degree. And I was just like, wow, there is a perfect description of this illusion of how it works in the spell. And my question to you is, now for a lot of us, we know there's still people stuck in this spell, obviously. But For those of us that have come to the awareness of this racism being an illusion of division, what are some practical steps that you can suggest that we take to shift out of that illusion, both on an individual level and also on a collective level?
On an individual level is what you just said. Learn the truth about, this is the part that people don't like to do. Do a little research. Where did race come from? Where's the first time we saw it? Biology helps a lot. For me, biology was a big thing. One of the biggest things that I denied the hardest, had the biggest cognitive dissonance over, was genetic results of African Americans. And by that, I mean that, for example, I have my great grandfathers, right? So I might be more related to some Irish people than I am to certain people on the continent of Africa, right? Like, it gets so crazy. Just for an example for people watching, anybody can look this up. Based on migrational patterns, you know how they talk about the out of Africa thing? The weird thing about it is that the way that we're taught it in school is very misleading. It's one group just came out of Africa. Like, that's not how humans are millions of years old. So for millions of years, humans have been coming out of Africa. So you have Homo erectus, things like that, boom, boom, boom. I don't want to get into all of that. But the main point is, even when our species called Homo sapiens, when we're coming out in groups. But what this means is, so if I have a group, right? So you have a group coming from East Africa, and then those groups of people adapt and become certain kinds of European people, let's say tens of thousands of years later. That means Ethiopian people, and this is just an example, y'all, but Ethiopian people would be more related to Irish people than Ethiopian people are related to South Africans. And this is the case, by the way. Ethiopians are much more related to certain European groups and Asian groups than they are to certain South African. Why? Because these lines that we make are fake. They're all just made up. Why wouldn't Ethiopia's right there next to Asia? Why wouldn't some of them be more closely related to some of the people on the continent of Asia than they are all the way down into South Africa? You're only assuming that they're more related because we call the continent Africa. But they live right there. They're trading with these people. They're communicating with these people. They're literally going to these places back and forth. But we have these like ideas in our mind of these constrictions. No, you're called African. So you got to be related to the other ones that we call African. And we also don't understand that, and this is one that's really hard for people. You can, because of a matrix, a medium, a structure that creates a spirit, and that spirit is responsible for the manifestation into the physical, right? And Orr's heard this a million times, but like I use a thylacine and a wolf, how they're not genetically related, but they live in the same niche or matrix, so they look exactly the same. In that same way, brother, there are people who look just like other people in the world that have no genetic relation to them. But because they live in the same niche in the matrix, for example, if you look at all the people who live on that equator line, go look at their physiology. It doesn't matter if they're in South America. It doesn't matter if they're in Australia. It doesn't matter if they're in Africa. They have the same niche across that line. And they develop very wide noses, right? They develop certain features to live in that kind of tropical, high dense forestry, heated area. So one, just information, challenge yourself. A lot of us like confirmation bias, especially when we talk about race. We love confirmation bias, whatever we want to believe, especially if we believe in something that makes us superior, but we don't want to let that go.
Of course, because the ego loves that identification. Oh my God. It's best fuel for that fire. Definitely. Yes.
And as far as a collective, there's two things. One is harder to do, and everybody knows when I say about that, you have to create a new matrix. You have to create a new society. That's harder. The one that's easier for us to do as groups is visit other groups. For example, me, there's a lot of things that I thought about the people living on the continent of Africa that just wasn't true, that I found out wasn't true by going to Lincoln University. So because I was in this place where there's all these foreign students, there's so much that I learned about people that I just didn't know. I didn't know, one, positive and negative. One, I thought that they would love African-American people, but there are some African people who love African-American people. And I met other people from the continent who they told me, they're like, my dad told me never to date on African-American. And then you got the other side.
Have you ever seen the movie Sugar Hill? with Wesley
I
Snipes.
have.
Gotta watch that movie. And again, but there's a scene where they're trying to do business, right? They're trying to negotiate business deals with Africans and the drug game. And the Africans is like telling Wesley Snipes and
All
his
that.
brother, he's like, "Oh, we can't do business with you. We can't do business with Fatah," or some word they said. And then Wesley Snipes is like, "What does this word mean?" He's cotton picker.
Oh,
And then he
snap.
just punched them, and then it was a big fight. But it's true. There are certain Africans that look down upon, because even that word African American is a construct,
Right.
but look at the indigenous, let's just call them the indigenous Negro
Right.
in America that's indigenous to these lands. They're looking at them as something separate because in actuality, they are separate. A
And
lot of the indigenous melanated people here come from indigenous tribes. And
well,
that's
yeah.
another.
So there's a spell even in. I wrote this down to a sister from Ghana. She, rest in peace, she's not here with us anymore. But I told her, I said, look, those are just stories, right? Like we're told. So over here, African American people, they're told like y'all are a bunch of dumb, animalistic people living in tents, starving to death. And I said, and over there, you're all told that we're all thugs and gangsters and that I'm gonna rob you and things of that nature. I didn't know the verbs to say it was a spell at the time, but I remember telling her, like, this is just things that we're taught. It's not true. She was actually very wealthy. And I was like, but I didn't grow up. Yeah, I've been in the hood. Like, I visit my dad on the weekends. Like, he lived in the hood, but I'm not some gangster kid. And most kids in the hood are not gangsters either. So that's not actually the way things work. And so meeting people and conversing with people and talking to people of other groups, in my opinion, it helps you because you get to see how constructed this stuff really is. You're talking to Brazilians. Brazilians think about race completely differently. Like they don't even see it like we see it. You go to other groups, they're like, we don't even see race like that. Some people told me one time, oh, you must come from America if you think like that. We don't think that.
That's how it is in Portugal, where my wife stays and where I'm going to be moving to. Race is not a big deal. You know what I mean? It's not something that they even focus on or care about or even look at as a real thing.
And so,
There's people that are darker than you that live in Portugal and they're Portuguese. They're like,
right,
I'm Portuguese and I
right.
roll with all these other Portuguese people no matter what their skin complexion is.
And so that Brazil's a lot like that. And it's funny because the Portuguese conquered Brazil, but they have that similarness, like that same kind of Brazilian thing. I'm Brazilian. I don't really care how dark or light somebody is. We're just Brazilian. And definitely getting to know other people, visiting different kinds of people, talking to different kinds of people, not shying away from the race conversation. And most importantly, I would say observe, because there's so many race spells out here. And we could go into it another day, but I personally think I actually think they're trying to turn African Americans against Native Americans right now. I think that's a part of the race spell. I see that going on TikTok all the time. People arguing about it and getting angry at each other over it. I think it's also a conversation that's not going to really get anywhere, because the main problem with that whole thing is America's diverse. So one, almost everybody here has Native American blood in them. Some have more than others. So for me, it's my great grandmother who's like literally indigenous tribe and all that, right? But they probably wouldn't accept me, and that doesn't really bother me. But my point is that in this whole issue going on in America, some of the two groups that stayed together the most were African peoples and Native American peoples. If you look through the history, the groups that were staying together the most, in fact, what people call, what's it called? Voodoo, that was literally a combination of what was called by Europeans African, Native American witchcraft. So they were literally coming together, sharing their science and their spiritual understandings in order to create something new. They created something that scientists are still using to this day, which is like this medicine that they used to give to in Africa. And also, this is why I know some people are angry when I say this, but this is why I don't really think it's a debate about certain African Americans coming from Africa, because there are things that literally came from Africa. So there was this certain fish that people use in Africa. Now they used it differently, and you could look this up. You'll find this very interesting. But they would make this whole ointment and they would give it to you, and you would go into a dead state. This is where the word zombie comes from, by the way. And you will go into this dead state where it appears that you're not breathing, your heart's not beating. Now, some of the doctors would use this to get people in a state of hypnosis. And then before you woke up, they would be able to say whatever they wanted to. They could erase your memories, and they would make you work for them in their farms. And you were called a zombie because you died and you came back, and now you have a master. Zombies used to always have a master, and this is where it comes from, this culture. Now, what they found out in science, they never died. The heart rate was just slowed down to a point, and the breathing was slowed down to the point where it seemed like it stopped. But at that state, you're in a hypnosis state. They can tell you to do whatever and you'll wake up. And you'll hear stories about people who ran from these zombie farms. And this is a real thing. This is a real phenomenon. African people and Native Americans, they say, oh, do y'all got anything for this? They said, anything like this? Because we want to use this. And so they said, we got something like that. And now they didn't create something the same exact way, but what they were using it for was ingenious. They used to literally give it to enslaved men or women and say, oh no, he died. And then the slave master would bury him. This is when somebody was going to be sold off or something. They would bury him. And then they would dig him up that night, take him out, let him wake up, and he would be able to run away free. And then they would put the casket back under the ground, and the slave master would believe that the person died. And so it was a way to get free. So I said all to say that we were like big allies. The reason why people aren't going to get to because you're not going to get to the bottom of it in the way of this. You have indigenous people who look just like me, but darker. You have African people who look just like me, but darker. Okay. You're just going to have that. So trying to figure out, to me, again, this is because of race spell, trying to figure out which one of us are the true indigenous, whatever that means. Because if you're from indigenous to what? Alaska? That's North America. Canada? Mexico? South America? Brazil? What are we talking about? The islands? Because the people in the islands looked very much different from the people who lived up in Canada and Alaska, Native Americans. Most of the Native Americans were wiped out. So yes, in the sense that, look, there are people for sure that were recategorized as African peoples who just looked like me, but were recategorized as African, right? Either because people were doing it on purpose, like they did with Mexican people, by the way. If you notice, they never called Mexican people indigenous. They never called them Native Americans. Never, not one time. They pushed them further and further and further out. But you have, it's like in Asia. It's like somebody saying one day, the Indians aren't really Asian. That's not what Asians look like. The Europeans aren't from the continent of Asia. The Middle Easterns aren't, they're all from Asia. They just got different looks. And so in that same way, I always say, I believe that it's intentional. I think that they're trying to divide groups more by creating a debate that I don't think would ever be solved, because let's say you go and do a DNA test. Are people going to believe the DNA test? Let's say that my DNA test says that I'm 50, 60% indigenous. Are people going to believe that? You know what I'm saying? So to me, it's, look, if you believe that you're indigenous, right, and you look like me, fine. You might be, or you should know, by the way, you should be able to trace it back. Now, I know my ancestors came from the slave trade because my families have kept a good amount of documentation. That's why I know Augusta, who has a Catholic name. She was Native American. That's my great-great-grandmother. Luke Corbett was her father, so she was half Native American, half Irish. But that's on my dad's side. And the man she married was from Jamaica. And he was a part of the Moors who came over in the slave trade over to Jamaica, and he always had the name Ali. And so I personally know these things, but I know some people don't. So again, do the research and try to accept the research for what it is without the cognitive dissonance. And remember, it doesn't really matter about it. They were all humans. If you want to be here in America, who's stopping you? You could be indigenous in a way that your ancestors might have left here and came back, because things like that happened before. So you all get so deep. I know that kind of was like a different topic I went into a little bit.
No, that's okay, because it leads to what I was going to go into as far as when it comes to this energetic feedback loop, trauma, right? Trauma is an energetic, matter of fact, for those of you that don't know what trauma is, it's basically an experience where you felt some type of and then that dis-ease that you felt now becomes a narrative, now becomes a spell that you stay bounded to, and it keeps energetically re-looping itself. With that being said, when we're talking about the spell of racism, every spell, and by the way, join the Philosophy of Order community, join the Network of Awareness community, because we talk about this a lot. And I talk a lot about energy. I talk about frequency. I talk about spirituality. I talk about things where a lot of things I talk about, people have to sense and feel and come to that realization instead of actually seeing it. They have to really see it within themselves. But going back to the spell of racism, every spell has a structure. And when we talk about illusions, have designs to them. So when we talk about them, racism is one of humanity's longest running programs. And it's not only in the social systems, but it's in these energetic architectures of the human body itself. And what I mean by that, it's coded in the lower chakras, it's coded through the survival centers. So when we talk about the fear-based matrix, fear, scarcity, safety narratives, all of those are manipulated to keep the collective vibration anchored to that root feeling, so to speak. Because if you can convince somebody that being that thing is safety and it's dependent on your skin color, you can control the energy because people want to feel safe. That's what they did with the Europeaners. Like when you were talking about the Irish and the Italians, at one time they were all against each other. They were considered the N-word back in the days. But then what did they do? They said, oh no, why don't we all be classified under this thing called white and we'd be more unified force, and then everybody else, we just push them to the side and we'll gain the wealth and some economic status. And now that thing has evolved here in America to that thing called white privilege, right? They used to call it that way. But the thing is this, is that when we're talking about energy, you can actually redirect its life force and to defend that illusion rather than ascending into awareness. So racism operates, from my perspective, as a energetic parasite, and it devours from within, just like a parasite does. It siphons the energy, feeding off the charge of that fear and that hatred and superiority. So every single racial conflict releases an energy, and that energy doesn't just disappear. It feeds this matrix. And that matrix that it feeds is going to perpetuate it. Now, how's it supposed to operate that way? That's why racism, for a lot of people, it feels cyclical because it reappears in new forms. It starts out as something and then it just evolves into classism and nationalism and all these little microaggressions that start playing themselves out. Because what I've come to realize, it's not just a social behavior disorder, it's an energetic feedback loop. It's a trauma loop. That's why you can even trace back to postpartum slave syndrome, which Dr. DeGroy talks about, and how it's passed on genetically. So the moment somebody identifies too strongly with a racial role, especially here in the United Shenanigans of America, there's either going to be the victim role, there's going to be the oppressor role, there's going to be the savior role, and all of these are anchored into a deeper grid of the matrix. 100%. And then it becomes the identity ego trap, where the person now says, based on what everybody's saying in this structure, that this illusion is who I am. This costume, this skin school suit that I like to call it, is now my identity. And I placed a mask on, and now it's separated me from that infinite conscious, that God source.
And the thing is, going back to matrices, creating physical realities. In order for a matrix to create a physical reality, it needs a pressure and a trigger. So what is the pressure and what is the trigger for it to come into being? For example, the story of, in order to be a man, you have to work at a factory, but it can't manifest without a pressure and a trigger. What you do is you destroy farms. You make it so that people cannot work at farms. And what does that do? I got to make my living somewhere. Right? And so that goes to the factory. But then at the factory, I also do this. I create an entire neighborhood based around this factory. And the only way that you will live in one of these houses is if you work in the factory. So now, in order to have shelter and to provide for my family and to earn a living to support my family, I have to work. Now it's become reality. See, before it was a story. Now it's reality. If I don't work at a job at this time, where do I work? I can't work at a farm. I'll be poor. I have a family. I need money. I need to make a living. And so you create pressures and triggers. Same thing with racism. On both sides, they would create pressures and triggers for that. And this is where you get these segregation laws and things of that nature, these Jim Crow laws. If you're caught here after sundown and this happens to you, pressure and trigger. And when it wasn't working, what they would do is they would always go in European communities and they would say, hey man, these people are trying to steal your jobs. They're trying to take over. And so they're creating the pressure. What are you going to do about it? You're not going to be able to feed your kids no more. They're going to hire all African-American people, and now you're not going to have a job. So that's what I'm saying. So all these systems have pressures and triggers, and that's how things that weren't a reality become a reality. Your physical body is a manifestation of your spirit. And it tells you a lot about the version of your spirit that you're manifesting right now in this moment. From the way your hair is, we know this, the way you treat yourself manifests on your body, the way you act, your attributes. Now, this is about to change dramatically. Gene sequencing, CRISPR, stuff like that, you are going to see changes on people that does not reflect their spirit in the slightest. Does not reflect their ancestry, does not reflect their hard work, right? Like, for example, if you've seen somebody, like you were talking about athletes that have a certain kind of body, you understand that they worked for it. And not in the next 20 years, if this society is still going, because they're going to be able to change that. So you're going to see race start becoming, remember, all the spells that civilization creates, it wants to make them more and more reality. But again, it's unsustainable. But as long as it can go, you'll see things get pretty dramatic. But like right now, like your race determines how smart you are and how rich you are and how fast you are. All these things that weren't true, like that Hitler believed and he was upset about during that race, that track race, stuff like that. That stuff can become very true, right? If people are rich and they all decide they want their kids to look like whatever the standard of beauty is, let's say blonde hair, blue eyes, but they also decide they want their kids to be fast and they edit their genetics to get all the genetics they need to be faster, to be stronger, to be taller. And if there are genetic components to do with intelligence, you better be sure that they're going to do that. If they can you're going to start seeing a complete full manifestation of what was fiction. And this is the part of civilization I think people don't understand my dire warning about the most, is that all the things that are fake that we go like, that's just made up from civilization. The goal is to make them real. The goal is to make it a physical reality.
Yeah. When you speak on that, and I won't touch on this too much, but it just reminds me of transgenderism, how you have these boys
Right,
that are fully built. There's a documentary about this, and they're running track against girls that are much smaller than them, but they classifying themselves as girls.
right,
They're saying they're feminine, they're women,
right.
and these are 15-year-old boys.
I watched it.
Oh, you've seen it, right?
I've seen it.
And it's just crazy how they're running these races, damn near lapping these girls. And I'm laughing because this is how crazy it is.
Yeah.
And then they're awarding them the medal like they really won the race as a female, and they're making this real.
Yes. And now this is so I was going to use this as an example, but I don't like to because it gets so charged. That's what I was thinking about.
Yeah, it does.
But so I want to make it clear to people when I talk about trans, like by no way ever am I saying that trans people are bad or evil because of trans. Here's what I want to tell you though. Here's what's happening. So a lot of people don't know about the chemicals, but phthalates are like the main one. Phthalates have the effect, they're on your plastics. By the way, if you were born anywhere in the 80s and 90s, you were affected by this. Okay. So what happens is you warm up plastic and these chemicals come from it called phthalates, and you eat it and you drink it. And for men, it dramatically reduces sperm. So ever since phthalates come out, we've been losing, I think, 1% of our sperm every year. And it's been, I think, 60 years. So we're like down 60%. And if it keeps going on, then men will become infertile. And it actually changes their eggs. Now, this is a big problem because women don't get new eggs. And if you're having a female, it increases her chance of having cancer. And if you're having a male, it does something that they call, and just let y'all, I read studies from the National Institute of Health to the World Health Organization. They're not even hiding it. It's in those papers. And they call it gender bending, where boys will be slightly more feminine from a biological anatomy level. And so this is an issue. Why is this an issue? What happens is, and this goes into the trans thing. So when I used to interact with trans people, I used to think that I'm gonna tell everybody my bias in this before I go further. My original bias was that I believed that trans people didn't actually believe that they were this, that they were just trying to take advantage of people. This is my earlier belief. I'm just going to be honest with everybody there. Now, when I found about these studies, I found out that I was completely wrong. Here's what's actually going on. So when you change a baby before they're even a baby, right, as an egg, and this happens to women too from other chemicals, like a woman might get shots of testosterone they're not supposed to get. So these women cannot procreate normally, or they need a lot of help to procreate because their uterus doesn't develop properly because they have too much testosterone in their bodies. And these women are also normally really good at sports. Now, sometimes this happens on more of a brain level, meaning, and this is the sad part, when you get somebody saying, I know that I am born as a male, but I do not feel like a male. I feel like a female. I used to think they were making that up, but this is from a deep chemical level. Now, are there going to be people, is there people all throughout history before plastic who claim this? Yes. And there's some shamans who claim this. But at the level it's happening now, it is due to the chemicals that is in your food. So all those TV dinners we're eating, things of that nature, you're starting to see a manifestation of what was happening to us from heating these extremely heated up plastics and digesting them into our bodies. And yeah, these, again, this is what I'm saying, these things in civilization has a cause. And things that we look at in the past and say, oh, there's no way that can happen. Trust me, the goal of civilization is that it will happen. And so you are going to get men installing artificial wombs. That's going to happen. I'm sorry, nobody knew that. That's just a reality. And so civilization is getting to the point. It wasn't always here, but we are getting to a point where civilization is starting to possess godly powers. Okay. And by that, it can create quick physical changes within reality much quicker than it could do before. Before it would take years. Now they're like, oh, you want that? We can do that. And in the next 20 years, it's going to become more dramatic. And so if civilization can make it through this next filtering system between 2027, 2028, 2029, that's when the fourth turning comes to the peak of the crisis period. If you look through all of the 4 cycles of each 80 years, 4 turnings each last for 20 years. There's 4 turnings of 20 years each. And so if you go back from this time, 80 years before then, 80 years before that, 80 years before that, 2025 is directly in the center of a transitional point, meaning everything from 2026 on is going to be dramatically different from 2024 in the past.
Going and leading up to 2030, where there's a lot of agendas that have been set in place to be executed.
Yeah.
Going back to the racism spell itself, I truly think that this is an energetic parasite. I really do. Like when it's an energetic parasite that's planted in the subconscious. And that dissonance, right? That is that energetic signature of racism. I look at it as it's a frequency that is of disharmony and distorts. It poisons perception on both sides. Both perceptions of reality. I talked about this on a live one time, and there was a lot of women that got really charged up about this when I said that the abuser, when it comes to racism, that the abuser and the victim are both under the same spell. That even though the person that's abusing through racism and being the aggressor, they're still under that spell as the abuser. And then the person that's suffering the abuse is still under that spell because they're getting that abuse, and that abuse is going to create some type of trauma, and that's going to be looped. And then they're going to perceive their reality a different way towards the person that abused them. And they're going to put that stigma on everybody that looks similar to that person.
Right.
So my thing is to heal this awareness. It's got to be reached at a DNA level because energetically trauma travels. We know this now. Trauma is very much an inherited vibration that could be passed on. And this memory of oppression and colonization and enslavement, it just doesn't live in the books. It lives in the cells, right? In the cells. So in order for us to break free from this, we have to realize that we're both sides of this black and white, good or bad. It's all being hypnotized. And in order for us to awaken, we got to break that generational spell through some type of spiritual alchemy and transform that pain into a purpose and really grow from it. And I think it's through divine remembrance that we break these spells, but that's just my opinion, because I think the only way to starve these parasites of self or of perception is by loving each other and really creating a harmony by seeing your reflection within another, which means that we have to see the soul behind the mask in order for us to have a meaningful connection. Because if we don't see the soul behind the mask and we only see a mask, then this negative loop or this spell of racism will just continue to survive, and we won't starve that parasite. Because there's a quote that says racism cannot live in a room where there's love. And I truly believe that to be true. Matter of fact, I know that to be true. I'm not going to even say I believe it. I know it to be true because it exposes fear. It exposes what fear is trying to hide. Love is always going to expose it. And that's why we're having this grand awakening or great awakening, because people are starting to love themselves, and that love that they have within themselves, they're starting to see it within their reflection.
Yeah, no, and I think when it comes to any oppressive system, whether it's, like you said, I think fear is a good hit, right? Racism, homophobia,
Transphobia.
I think a lot of these are situated in fear. I think the pressure is normally some sort of fear. And two things. So one, the reason why humans didn't really have these issues before, like for example, if you go to hunter-gatherer tribes, they interact with other hunter-gatherer tribes, even ones that look different than them. And the reason why is because they're like, bro, it's not that deep. Like, we're just people. We can come together. We can figure things out. They even found out that some gatherers, even though there were different tribes, they would come together to help each other take the boys through like a ritual to become a man. Even though they were of different tribes, the different hunter-gatherer tribes would come together, and during those meetings, trade tools and ideas and things that they could do. Humans are made to interact with each other. In fact, interacting with people who are different from you actually causes evolution. It causes growth. In fact, in the famous book, I say, don't become isolationist. It's the worst thing you can do. You'll stop every growth from becoming an isolationist. You have to interact with other people, other groups who will believe different things. And then another thing is, we're naturally egalitarian, but you can't just tell people to treat each other equal. That doesn't work. There has to be a matrix. So we're all contributing equally in a group, and we love our group, like you were just saying, then we're going to treat each other with that same love. We become one group. In order for this group to exist, therefore, we love each other because we know that you are a crucial part of this group. And if you're not here, then this group is no longer this group. And so I love each individual like I love the group. And I think a lot of times religion's a good example of this, and trying to scare people to create separation. The way Yahweh, some of the ancient Egyptian gods, would get people to do what they wanted them to do is say, if you don't listen to me, you're going to suffer for eternity. You're going to go to hell. And so when I tell somebody that gay people, for example, go to hell, or like trans people go to hell, what's going to happen is I'm going to associate them with demonic forces. I'm going to associate them with hell. And now I'm afraid that which is ridiculous if you think about it, but their like transness or gayness is going to get on me, and now I'm going to be condemned to hell. And a lot of these things come from what I learned, come from religion. Me and my wife have conversations about this stuff all of the time. But I learned a lot of it comes from negative, toxic versions of religions. And so it's the exact opposite of what we're saying. We're just talking about the group loving one another, realizing that we're one group and coming together under that. I remember they asked a hunter-gatherer, it wasn't a video, I was reading an interview. They asked him, like, what if this man said that he only, I mean, first of all, he had a hard time understanding what he was talking about because they don't have that in their culture. But when he finally realized what he was talking about, he was like, you don't care? Doesn't matter to me. He was like, why not? Nobody else here is like that. It doesn't really affect me. As long as he's doing his part in the group. Like literally, as long as he's doing his part, I'm doing my part. It doesn't really matter to me. And they were confused, like, why do you care? We care because we're raised up in a culture that teaches us to separate one another on going to hell, who's going to heaven, and this person's a sinner, and this person's pure, this person's not, this person's white, this person's black. But all of those divisions are really just false. All just really, by the end of the day, false. You're always going to get humans that are unique and different. And unfortunately, depending on the time that you're born in and being unique, you'll either be praised as some sort of amazing person or you'll be persecuted and killed by the state. And that's just the reality of it. No, I say all that to say that I fully agree. I want to tell anybody who's watching is that if you're not engaging with someone because they're browner than you or lighter brown than you, question that. If you're not going to hang around someone because their sexuality is different than yours, question that. If you're not going to hang around somebody because they believe or they feel like they're one gender or sex rather than the other, question that. I'm not saying that you need to go and seek out people you don't want to hang out with. I don't believe in that either. I'm only going to hang out with people I want to hang out with. But if I don't want to hang out with somebody for that specific reason, I critically examine myself. Is this a good reason? Is this a prejudice I have? Where is this thought coming from? I love to do that to myself. I love to inspect myself. I love to critically examine my mind and my brain. And I'm like, oh, I know exactly. That came from when because I have a bias still. I still fight the race spell. When I see older white men about 55 years old with blonde hair, I tend to have, I don't really like you. And be honest, why? I found out why. Want somebody who looked exactly like
I'm
that.
actually a little shocked that you're still battling with this, but why
Oh,
is
yeah,
that?
I
Why
know,
do you
I
still
battle with it. And like you were saying, trauma. He threatened to, came out with a shotgun, threatened to shoot me and my dog. And so that stayed with me. Now,
Yeah.
I know, then this is the part where I say awareness. You have to be aware of your shadows or they'll just take over. If you're going to pretend like they don't have any sort of homophobia or things like that, and they used to, when I tell people all the time, there are things I still struggle with. I can know
Right.
that
We all
something is
do. Yeah.
wrong and still battle with my subconscious mind. And that's what it's about. I'm always more wary of Captain America's. I always said I prefer Iron Man's. I like people who say, yeah, man, I got some issues. I'm dealing with it. I'm trying to fix it. I don't like people who say, I'm pure. I'm a good guy all around. I would
And I
never do
came here
anything.
to save the day.
Yeah, I am uncorruptible. That makes me nervous because people like that can't see it. They have what one job of work that they were really good on some of this stuff. He said that's called your blind spot. And sometimes the worst thing could be a blind spot because you think it's not there. You think you're doing great and everybody else can see it and you can't see it. And so those people make me nervous when it comes to morality, because if you truly think that you are incorruptible, then it's going to be so easy to corrupt you. The easiest people to manipulate, those are the easiest people. It's the people who recognize I am able to be manipulated. Here are my weak points. Because I know these are my weak points, I need to be on guard when I'm talking to manipulative people on these points. I know that if somebody knows, for example, about me, that some white man did threaten to shoot me and my dog with a shotgun when I was a kid, they might try to use that against me. So that man right there, they might know who he looked like. That man, he told me that he wants to do something terrible to you and your family. I'm just telling you might want to handle that. See, I know that I'm being manipulated because I know that's a place where I'm weaker at. So I know, like, I'll find out for myself. I'll go talk to him. But when you don't know, you might get angry. You might say, I knew it. And so for me, that's how I'm able to do research the way I do it, with the lack of bias, because I know where I'm biased at. I know what I want to be true. I know what I want to be false. And that enables me to do more objective research, is having that realization. And so I think everybody should try to be as honest as possible when it comes to stuff like that. Overall, with the race spell, I truly believe everybody's human, but just like I say in the demons will give birth to angels in a new world born pure, right? And so what I mean by that is, at first when I read that, I actually didn't know what that meant. But what that means is, because I was just like writing it as it came, like in my brain, I was just putting it out as the message was. But what that means is, look, man, we were born in this thing. There's just certain parts of us that, and I'm not trying to be negative, but there's just certain parts of us that have some shadows on it. Like you know what I'm saying? You grew up in certain areas, right? You've been in certain places. And so it's going to be on you. That's just a reality. But it's our responsibility, whether you're giving birth to the new generation, like physically, like reproduct, or you're teaching the next generation. It's your job to create a generation without those things. Going back to what we spoke about my daughter. It's my job to make sure that she doesn't have those biases. I might have those biases till I die. I don't know. But it's my job to make sure she does not. And I think that a lot of these spells will be destroyed if we create a matrix for another generation to live in. Not everybody can make it to the promised land. That's one of my favorite quotes because I was angry at it the first time I heard it. Not everybody can make it to the promised land. What do you mean by that? Not everybody can make it. Everybody needs to make it. Everybody can't make it though, right? Everybody can't make it. And that world that we all want to live in, it might not be this version of you. It might be another version of you living in that 1,000 years from now who doesn't have these memories, and that's okay.
And you answered, I was going to ask you a question about how do we rewrite this energetic story of humanity so that unity becomes the default vibration and not division. But you pretty much answered it. And I really like the level of self awareness that you have because it takes a lot for somebody to be with themselves in that manner, to be aware that not only that they're not just perfect, but that they have these biases that they have to regulate and check on because it could lead them astray. And I
100%.
just thought that's pretty interesting. For anybody that's listening, that's a high level of self awareness. And we should strive to have that level of self awareness within ourselves with anything that we perceive to be true or false and how it affects us emotionally, because that could be a matter of life and death. So, with that being said, I want to wrap things up and I'm going to ask you this question when it comes to spirituality. And it's this: how can we transform this racism spell through some type of spiritual alchemy? What's some practical steps we could take as individuals to shift from this reactive anger to more of a creative awareness? And from your perspective, how do you think? Because I talk a lot about unity consciousness, and that's what my channel, even on TikTok, is all about. I always talk about unity, consciousness, collaboration, and we're all collaborating towards peace and harmony. But from your perspective, when it comes to that unity consciousness, do you think it could be cultivated collectively just beyond a spiritual talk, but actually be a lived experience?
Yeah, I think on two fronts. So I think I love the topic of consciousness. I think on one level, and I'm sure you would agree with this, consciousness is always unified, but it's like, are these different kinds of consciousness aware that the consciousness is unified, therefore creating another level of unity within that space, right? Like when me and you become aware that we share a consciousness, that we share things, that we are like one, that awareness creates a level of unity. So I guess there's layers of unity here, right? Because in one way, we're all already unified. Like we all live on the earth, but we can all be unified as in we are in one place, but be very disunified in practice. And so I think I know some people are not going to like me saying this, but because the whole flat earth debate. But one of the most interesting quotes from astronauts is they say they go up and they see this ball or this globe, right? And then they say, oh my God, we're just on this ball. Like we are all together. Some of them have a whole religious, they come back and they start changing. They try to help people and they try to help the poor. And then when psychologists ask these astronauts, why are you acting like this? Because I looked at us and we were all on the same planet and there's nowhere else to go. It's just us. It freaks them out. We have to take care of this place. Like, we got to take care of each other. We're all we got. They get in this almost like frantic unity state. It's not the state that I want people to be in because it's still like a bit of a fear state. If we don't make this work, where's it going to work? I don't want it to be like that. But you see this level of, wait a second, you mean it's us? Like we're like together kind of thing. And so there's that level. So there's levels of awareness in that sense of, and I hate to put awareness in levels. I like to say different kinds, but in this talk, I'm going to say levels here because we're talking about unity. So not just of being unified, but being aware that we are unified, and being aware that we are together and our consciousness is connected. But I think to even go deeper is what I learned about just from studying Earth. Nothing does anything for no reason. Nothing just is going to do something for whatever. When I was a teacher, me and my assistant teacher, we had a debate one time because I was awarding the students for doing the right things. Why are you giving them an award for doing the work? That's what they're supposed to do. I'm like, what does that mean though? You need an incentive. You don't come here and teach kids because you're supposed to. You're getting paid to do it. But you are supposed to teach the children. You are supposed to teach the youth, but that's not why. If they stop paying you, would you come? People need reasons to do what they do, even if it's not monetary. If it's an award, maybe it just makes them feel good. So we have to build a society that incentivizes unity. This society incentivizes separation above all else. You know, what I call fake unity. They promised us with the age of the internet that we were going to unite, with the age of social media that we were going to unite, with the Google and Zooms that we were going to unite. It hasn't happened. And that's because unification is not incentivized. What's incentivized in our culture is us versus them syndromes. And this is why you'll rarely hear me talk about politics, because as soon as you say politics, people begin to divide their minds on these things that they give you. So, yeah, I think the main thing is like what you're talking about to me is egalitarianism. And I'm gonna see, maybe I send you some clips if I could find them that I used to study. But when you hear some of these people talk about what the tribe is to them, like what it means to be one tribe, you might get a little jealous. I'm like, Dad, man, you grew up like that? Like where y'all are just like one cohesive thing. Like you still have your own individuality, but your individuality, like I am because we are because I am. Like they live it. They're like, this is just reality. We don't know any other.
Yep.
We don't even know any other way of being. I
Yep.
love that. And to me, that is the unity that we need to get back to. And I think once we move past this kind of society we call civilization, we can move on to greater things. But on a smaller token, for those watching, like, okay, but how can I do anything now? I think you should join communities like Aura's communities, like my communities. I think you should look for people who have similar goals and objectives. Because we come from a religious culture, we want to convert. That's our thing. Everybody wants to go and convert and spend all their time trying to convince everybody.
There's people trying to convert people to awaken.
That's what I'm saying. And I'm like, bro, why don't you just go talk to the people who are already there? Like the other people, they'll come along. But we already
Exactly.
got people here who are trying to find people to come together. And then I'll leave it on this. When it comes to unity, it's like you just said. We do not, and I tell you this all the time, we do not need to agree on everything. That's, again, religious thinking. We do not need to agree on everything. I am friends with people who think things that are completely contrary with me. One of my closest friends, my brother-in-law, he's in the Nation of Islam. My brother, my blood brother, another one of my closest friends, he's Catholic and he believes in the democratic process of the United States of America. We completely disagree. And sometimes we talk about these disagreements, but I love him and he loves me. So we can disagree and still be together and still love one another.
Absolutely. And I was going to mention how you took the words out of my mouth, but I was going to say the way that you can overcome this is by joining communities of similar values to yours and then integrate yourself with those communities. And the more you do that, those communities are building just like your community. Have you hit 1,000
Close.
members? Because remember, I said I want to celebrate that. I think we should all celebrate
Yeah.
it, right?
Yeah.
So don't forget that. Let's celebrate
we're
when
gonna
we hit
celebrate.
1,000. And it doesn't have to necessarily be 1,000, but when we hit over the 1,000 mark. But the thing is that I think that by joining those types of communities, like what I'm doing, I'm part of a lot of communities
Yeah.
right now, and it's growing. And I'm conditioning my subconscious to be part of community to the point where, as electromagnetic bodies that we have, being multidimensional beings as we are, the more we put ourselves in those environments, we're going to magnetize more of that.
100%.
So we don't have to
Social
we don't
matrix.
have to necessarily recruit, but our example will be the recruitment.
100%.
As it is now. That's how we're forming these communities, through example.
Exactly.
People are drawn to how we're setting the example, and they're like, I resonate with that example energetically, and it makes that, and we create a synergy.
100%.
So with all that being said, your final thoughts, your final transmission for this episode on racism, spell of racism.
I'll say this. If you're like me and have a certain amount of melanin, and because I run into these people all the time, I get it, right? You're starting from the historical points. You're seeing these crazy things. Just understand that the ancestors who you hold up so high were not under a race spell, and they didn't even know of anything called race. And so those ancestors, same thing for European groups. Your ancient ancestors, before they were colonized by the Romans, by the way, when they were the indigenous people in a land being conquered, they didn't believe in nothing called race. They didn't believe in that. They didn't have anything like that. These things, these opinions and spells were forced upon you. You were indoctrinated, and you do not have to uphold these beliefs. If you look at your entire ancestry, it's a very small percentage who believed in this stuff that you believe in today. And I'll tell all the people who are just trying to come out of it, to get to change yourself in any meaningful way, it is not through willpower. You legislate behavior. This is part of philosophy of order. You cannot just write down, I won't be racist anymore. Doesn't work like that. That's not how you create change. If you want to come into your higher self, you have different possibilities, different timelines. I'm not going to go into the whole fifth dimension thing right now, or quantum physics and multiple world interpretation, but in order to invoke a certain version of yourself, you have to build that matrix. You have to build mental matrix, which everybody talks about, which is awesome, but you also have to build the social matrix. You have to build the digital matrix. What are you watching? You have to build the physical matrix. What do you see when you wake up? What are you walking through? But for this particular topic, the social matrix is the biggest part. You have to start surrounding yourself with people who believe something counter to what you believe, who represent something counter to what you represent. And through that, you'll be able to create a new person that's beyond that race spell. Definitely, I know this is Aura's community. I want y'all to continue to support Aura. I think Aura is awesome. He knows that. I can't wait till he starts writing books and stuff. And then also, definitely check out the philosophy of order. Any of the books, Fams, World War Gods, any of that. But most importantly, my thing is just create a new matrix for yourself if you want to become a better version of yourself.
Ashe. And also, too, we're going to have a link in the description for this episode to join the Philosophy of Order community, a free community. There's other upgrades that you can join once you're in there to have further mentorship and be part of, let's just say, other community courses that can help you elevate, upgrade, and ascend into a better state of being than the one you're in now. And the last thing I'm going to say is thank you, brother, for coming up and for
Thank you for
sharing your
having me.
wisdom, your peace, your presence, your knowledge, and for helping people to understand how to apply this knowledge, really, of self. The self-awareness is so key and so important now. So with that being said, I want to thank everybody who came to this episode. They watched the full episode. And I know you got great substance. I'm not going to even hope that you did. I know that you got substance from this. As always, when you live in the present, there's always an opportunity for a new beginning. And the beautiful thing about being present is that there always can be a new beginning to something. You can always pivot to a new trajectory in life. There's nothing stopping us. And don't look for the light at the end of the tunnel, because the light is and always will be within you. So you light up the tunnel and find your way through the darkness. And as always, here on the Network of Awareness, as you saw today, that we have meaningful connections with our reflections and we gain elevation. We're not under the spell of racism. We've dispelled and debunked the spell of racism here in the now. So peace, love, balance, and abundance to you all. Thank you. Peace, peace, peace.
Through connections with our reflections, we gain elevation.